Welcome to the Biostatistics Department Centennial event and launch for our departmental history exhibit. If you have any questions about any of the artifacts, please feel free to ask me. I'm Karen Thomas. I'm the Bloomberg School historian. Our history of the school that I wrote is coming out with JHU Press in June, and your department is very well represented. And I have a lot of great things to say about biostatistics. And I had the great pleasure of actually co-authoring a chapter of a book on the history of academic biostatistics with Karen and Scott Ziegler and Chuck Rohde. So I really got in on the ground floor there. I want to start out by telling you a story that George Comstock told, the great epidemiologist, one of the leading chronic disease epidemiologists of the 20th century. And he really appreciated biostatisticians, and I think you'll understand that about him from this story. So there's once a group of biostatisticians and a group of epidemiologists riding together on a train to joint meetings. All the epidemiologists had tickets, but the biostatisticians only had one ticket between them. Inquisitive by nature, the epidemiologists asked the biostatisticians how they were going to get away with such a small sample of tickets when the conductor came through. The biostatisticians said, "Easy, we have methods for dealing with that." Later, when the conductor came to punch the tickets, all the biostatisticians slipped quietly into the bathroom. When the conductor knocked on the door, the head biostatistician slipped their one ticket under the door, thoroughly fooling the layman conductor. After the joint meetings were over, the biostatisticians and the epidemiologists again found themselves on the same train, always quick to catch on. The epidemiologists had purchased one ticket between them. The biostatisticians, always on the cutting edge, had purchased no tickets for the trip. Confused, the epidemiologists asked the biostatisticians, "We understand how your methods worked when you had one ticket, but how can you possibly get away with no tickets?" "Easy," replied the biostatisticians smugly. "We have different methods for dealing with that situation." Later, when the conductor was in the next car, all the epidemiologists trotted off to the bathroom with their one ticket, and all the biostatisticians packed into the other bathroom. Shortly, the head biostatistician crept over to where the epidemiologists were hiding and knocked authoritatively on the door. As they had been instructed, the epidemiologists slipped their one ticket under the door. The head biostatistician took the epidemiologist's one and only ticket and returned triumphantly to the biostatistician group. Of course, the epidemiologists were subsequently discovered and publicly humiliated. Moral of the story, do not use statistical methods unless you understand the principles behind them. So, great, an epidemiologist with great respect for biostatisticians. I only have a fairly limited amount of time, and I know that y'all want to socialize, so I have a Chuck Rohde oral history that goes kind of well with this story, so I'm going to put that on for you. And I hope that we can all, my setup here is a little constrained by the length of the boards, but we'll make it work. There. Okay. So this is Chuck Rohde talking about the importance that Alan Ross and really all of the chairs of biostatistics have said that one of their main jobs is to infect the school with a passion for good data. Okay? So this is how Chuck Rohde himself did that. Here we go. So this is about the work that Dr. Rohde did. He was very involved in environmental health research, and he was a frequent consultant all over the university for environmental health research. And he was sent by the then department chair Alan Kimball to talk to a biologist over at Homewood, and this is what happened. So let me cue this up exactly the right place here.
Why, whether it's of any scientific interest or not, doesn't make any difference. That's a skep increase.
Okay. Can everybody hear?
So money was there, and this biologist was going to study whether or not the increase in temperature would affect the success of spawning.
There were a bunch of nuclear plants that were being built, and he thought that would raise the temperature of the Chesapeake Bay.
So Alan Kimball asked me to talk to him, so I did. And I said, well, now what's the experiment you have? He says, well, I have 10,000 eggs that I'm going to incubate at whatever the temperature of the bay was, and then I've got another 10,000 I'm going to incubate at another 5 degrees and so on. 10 temperatures, 10,000 eggs. That sounds like a big experiment.
So do you understand what he said? The experiment is he's going to incubate the eggs to see if they hatch or not at all these different gradations of different temperatures, and he has 10,000 eggs to do it with.
And he said, I'm going to count the proportion that are fertile after a couple of days. So then I asked a naive question. I said, where did you get the eggs? And he said, well, that's not relevant, is it? And I said, well, I'd just like to know where you got the eggs. And he said, well, we caught this female fish, and that's where our eggs came from.
All 10,000.
Not only all 10,000, but 10,000 of every dose. Then I asked the second naive question. I said, do all striped bass spawn at the same temperature? And at that he got a little bit upset. He didn't throw me out of his office, but it's clear that I was no longer wanted there, and I told Alan what happened. He said, yeah, he said, that's what I thought. He said, good job. That's what you were supposed to do. So there was an example of a totally useless experiment. The sample size was 1, but there was thousands of dollars put into the study of one fish.
Okay, so thousands of dollars for a study of one fish, sample size of 1. So that is what you biostatisticians are protecting the world from. So I think that really does go along well with the Comstock story. It's just about the importance of biostatistics and good data, and that scientists who aren't trained in your field don't always think about those things. So I just want to, I'm not going to show all my slides, but I'll go through a couple of them. What the monochromatic calculators show, there's 3 examples from the 30s, from the 60s, and one even from the 70s. It has been around a long time, and so for about 70 years of this school's history, all of the students who took the required Intro to Biostatistics course used those kind of calculators. Now, in the really old days, they actually had to be hand cranked. There were no electric ones.
The brand name was Facet for those. Actually.
Okay.
How do I know? I use.
Yes. So when you look at those photographs on display, you can see all the mainly guys in suits hunched over their little monochromatic calculators, calculating statistics. So I think one of the most interesting and important points about the history of biostatistics at this school and in general is that biostatistics and computing have really gone hand in hand. In fact, if you go all the way back to 1879, John Shaw Billings, who's the first librarian for the Surgeon General, and he eventually helps found the National Library of Medicine. He created Index Medicus to kind of gather together all of the different scholarship in public health and medicine, which was fairly small at that time. And then he trained a man named Herman Hollerith, who used the punch card tabulator, and eventually goes on to help found IBM. So census data, vital statistics, because of course your department's original name is biometry and vital statistics. Computing and public health were really like intertwined from the very earliest days of both the US Census and of public health. So this advertisement down on the right, so that's the type of machine that Hollerith used that was just like an automated machine for just sorting through multiple punch cards, and it reduced the processing time for the census from 8 years to 2 years. But by the 50s, when this ad is from, I don't know how well you can see it, there's a planet Earth as seen from space, and like a little electron orbiting the name Monroe. I mean, it's very space age, okay? And yet that's still an electric analog calculator, keep in mind. Okay, we haven't even gotten to computers yet. So as you go forward, one of the major things this department has done, we were just joking about sample size of 1, haha. When you take a look at what your first chair, Raymond Pearl, did, he published the first article, or one of the first, that really definitively associates cigarette smoking with lung cancer in 1938. Okay, Surgeon General's report doesn't come out until 1964, so he's way, way ahead of the curve. So in order to do that, he studied 7,000 patient records. This is an era when routinely medical studies are using single-digit samples, single-digit numbers of patients from clinics. So Pearl using 7,000 people in a study was unheard of, and in order to do it, he had to use this type of technology, which both the school and the public health service had been at the forefront of developing. As we get into the mid-1940s, so Halbert Dunn and your second chair, Lowell Reed, who also became dean of the school, worked very closely together. And in fact, the U.S. Census Bureau was housed in what's now the, on Market Square, help me, what's the name of that building? Candler Building. It was housed in the Candler Building. The U.S. Census was right there. I'm sorry, the Social Security Building. That was the Social Security. The U.S. Census was also, I guess it was in D.C. But anyway, we had very close access to this massive data sets. So Halbert Dunn, and he's working very closely with Lowell Reed, who had really pioneered a lot of the early statistical methods in the Eastern Health District. And if you want to learn more about the Eastern Health District, ask me later, but basically a lot of the pioneering work in statistical methods in population studies was begun in the immediate neighborhood around this school. And so once you have the concept and the methods of record linkage, that is huge. That goes throughout not only all types of scientific research, but if anybody has bought something on, say, Amazon lately, that's record linkage too. They're linking your purchase to your consumer, your individual purchaser record. And so that really enables, I'm going to skip ahead a bit, that enables Alan Gittleson to do amazing things. So record linkage helps connect birth records with infant mortality records, maternity, with, so the more you have these individual data sets that have been created with these little paper punch cards, but Alan Gittleson is the one that figured out how to connect them all together. And that is so huge. I can't tell you how revolutionary that was for public health. And so on my Biostatistics by the Numbers poster, in 1982, when he published his work on the National Death Index, he had enlisted dozens of faculty and biostatistics students for the, quote, impossible task, and it took them years to do, of processing basically 3 gigabytes of data. But it did come from 21 million death records in about a decade's time. So this gives you a sense of how the methods of population research were changing over time, how they were changing hand in hand with computing, and how very, very important to public health. I mean, we really would not have public health without biostatistics. It's always been just a foundational discipline. So I'll just end here by saying that in 1977 we only had 3 computer terminals in the entire school, and those that you did use, you had to share them. But biostatistics was definitely at the very cutting edge of just teaching statistics generally, but of adopting these new computer programs and methods of data analysis that really, had started back with Raymond Pearl through Lowell Reed, then Alan Gittleson, and then Jim Tanasha really also worked very closely with Gittleson in doing both research and teaching in what we now would call big data. Okay, so by 1983. The school catalog tells you that basically if you can't use computers, you're illiterate. So that's when we actually get microcomputers, individualized computers, instead of having giant mainframes. And we start to actually teach people specifically how to use statistical, SAS and do programming. So I will end there. But if you have any other questions about the history of the department or want to talk about any of the artifacts or the posters, please let me know. I do have a YouTube video that shows exactly how the Reed-Frost model worked. It's Lowell Reed, your esteemed chair, explaining this to a national television audience in 1951, how the Reed-Frost model worked. But I'll just save that for later in case you want it, but I'll give you to our Kriegspiel experts. Thank you.
Well, Karen, thank you very much. As we transition, I do want to make sure that everyone has seen, so the actual, one of the items from the Reed-Frost model is sitting up on top of those bookcases there. If you haven't ever looked at the YouTube video, you definitely should go check it out. Him explaining population dynamics, on WBAL television or something like that. We also are privileged that we have one, it might be more, but you might be the only remaining Kriegspiel player left in the department. And so I think nearly everyone here knows that Kriegspiel used to be an enormous part of the biostat culture. People would play just about every day. It was famed for the vitriol that would fly back and forth during the presentation. But Robbie was a regular player. So Robbie, let me turn it over.
There was even a room named as the Kriegspiel.
There was,
Yeah,
across Kriegspiel Stadium.
That's right.
And which unfortunately we lost to another department. But
They took the name.
yeah.
Yeah, it was right next to the biostats office.
Yeah.
So I came to Hopkins Biostats in '99, and so I played a lot of chess before, and competed in tournaments and things like that. But so I used to pass by at lunchtime, and there's all this commotion, mostly Chuck Rhodey. but even Professor Royal. I mean, you see a different kind of demonic personality of Professor Royal. You never see that outside of that room, and So and then there was Tom Giarte. I don't know how many of you know Tom. So I call him the Cuban Capablanca. He's a wonderful Kriegspiel player actually, and then Tom Travison used to play quite often, and so Tom Travison and I were the only students, graduate students. So it was a great experience actually, because Chuck Rody would just yell at me all the time. Like, how do we get this guy admitted in the department? He's got no IQ. Yeah. So, but then I realized it took me a while to figure out. I was telling Ingo that the more he yelled at me, the better my moves were actually. So it took me a while to figure out that he was actually complimenting me when he was yelling at me. And but anyway, so this game is really fascinating. I think it's great for statisticians because it's chess under uncertainty. You only have partial information, so it's a question of how you sort of put the pieces together, and figure out as the game evolves. Hopefully you're learning more and more, and have a good understanding of what your opponent's piece structure, pawn structure looks like. And so when you first come in as a chess player, you don't realize that. You think that, queen, is so important, so I shouldn't lose my queen. But Kriegspiel, it's not about losing pieces and stuff like that. More important is gaining information, actually. So you should be sort of mix caution with aggression. So you have to probe a little bit. And then at the same time, you have to hide back a little bit so you don't give information away to your opponent. So if you probe too aggressively, then your opponent also gets to learn about what you're doing. So it's kind of a really strategy that Richard Royal was really good at. He'd be just moving pieces around like aimlessly, like here or there. So I used to be like, what are you doing? It makes no sense what you're doing. Because you think like a chess player, Whereas in Kriegspiel board, you think very differently, and the whole goal is to not give stuff away to your opponent, and if they get impatient and start coming after you, then you figure out where their pieces are.
So that center board, there's a referee that makes those moves, is that right?
Correct.
There's somebody with complete information sitting around.
That's right. So Chuck Rody always played the referee. He was a total chicken. He never. He used to call me chicken all the time. But I used to tell him, "Why don't you come and play?" He never did. He didn't even play a single game the whole time.
I don't know why.
Right?
I don't know why.
Have you ever seen him play a game?
Yeah, no, he never plays.
Yeah, he never
Brody on
played.
the phone.
Yeah.
Check defending himself.
And so, like I remember the first time I used to play in chess. You have this fool's mate and scholar's mate, right? Fool's mate is like made in two, right? So suppose you can everyone see? I mean, so you move your king pawn to two places, right? E4, pawn to king 4, and then black plays this, right? Of course, you don't see what he's playing. Suppose he plays this, right? Then you say, okay, let me try this. And then he plays this, right? And then you take your queen there, and it's checkmate, right? So this is fool's mate.
That's 3 moves.
Right? That's 3. Okay. So then black can do that actually. So if you want 2 moves made, right? So white moves f4, and black moves e6, right? The pawn in front of the king, and then white plays g4, and then black plays queen to h4 checkmate, right? So that's 2 move made, right? So I tried that the very first time. And then of course, they don't play F pawn and G pawn, right? But then if it doesn't work, so the referee doesn't announce a check, right? So you go there, and suppose he moves something else, like this, and then you take your queen there. So the referee doesn't say anything. Then you know that, okay, he didn't move the F pawn, right? Because there is no check.
The referee would announce check if it happened.
Yeah, if there is a check, the referee has to announce it. So and then not only check, he will announce that your king is in check from long diagonal or short diagonal, or on the rank or on the file. So you would know which, So this would be like, if it has moved this, then it would be like check on the short diagonal, because this would be the long diagonal, right? So you get information when there is a check.
And would the referee just say there's a check, or would he say?
He would say you have check on the long diagonal or short
Okay.
diagonal.
Okay.
He'll give you that full information,
Yes.
right? So then you have to say, okay, you probably queen or bishop is giving him a check, because nothing else can give you check on the diagonal, right? So then suppose he has a pawn there, and I move this, right? And then the referee will announce, you have a pawn capture, right? So then, in a place like this, then everybody has a pattern. Like, so I start with this one, I try this. He says no, 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 no. This, of course, is. Suppose you try this, right? This is an illegal move, obviously. So he'll say, hell no, or that's nonsense, Because what sometimes people do is they try illegal moves just to throw the opponent off, right? So if you try to make illegal moves, he'll just say, that's nonsense, or that's.
So Robbie, would that be true for an illegal move that was because a knight doesn't move that way, or does it always have to be an illegal move in that another piece is blocking or something like that? Or could it be either?
It could be either.
Okay.
It could be either.
So you could just make an illegal move
Yeah.
because you don't move a piece that way.
That's right.
Okay.
Whereas suppose you try to, let's say you have your knight here, right? It's blocking the check. So now I try to move my knight, he would say, no, you can't. Then you say, oh, okay, maybe my knight is pinned, So then you get information, you say, okay, maybe the queen is there. So you try to move the pawn there next time, right? So hopefully I can get this guy. Suppose he's sitting right here. Then he would have announced you have a pawn capture, right? So you would know that you have a pawn capture. But since he didn't say that, you just go there. Then, this guy moves something else, right? He moves this. Then the next time he says you have a pawn capture. Then you go, aha. So you try this. And then he says it works, right?
So,
Like that you try to gain information by...
so you can try moving as many pawns as you want until you find the capture?
No, he will announce, the referee will announce,
You get it.
if you have a pawn capture, he says you have a pawn try or pawn capture, and then you try all the possibilities and then you get it, right? They say that in some places they actually tell you you have a pawn capture on this square. So in order to not waste time, like, everyone goes through this.
But if you don't do the pawn capture and moved another pawn into a pawn capture move, then you could hit it with a different one, right? If you could have multiple pawn captures in the system.
Yeah. Correct. You could.
And how long is lunch?
It was about. We usually used to play after lunch too.
Exams used to be
Yeah.
postponed.
Yeah,
How
right.
many papers could have been written if Chris?
Yeah, I was reading up a little bit. I saw a paper that was published as part of UCLA stats report, technical report, by Thomas Ferguson on how to mate with two bishops, in Kriegspiel. In chess, of course, it's easy, but in Kriegspiel, it's really hard because you don't know where the king is, right? And so he had written a very nice paper about how to do that.
So there's a lot of design of experiments in this, isn't
Yeah,
there?
and then he says you cannot do it with probability 1. It has to be, it cannot be probability 1 because he explains why it is, which is kind of interesting actually. Because you have to leave the bishops unguarded. Like the king has to be right close to the bishop so that the two bishops are protected. Otherwise, the opponent king can capture one of the bishops. If you get too ambitious and try to corner the other king and leave your bishops unprotected, he can capture that. So and then if you try to corner him, then he can get stalemated, which is a draw. So there are all these tricks in there. So there's a nice paper explaining that. So that's kind of the idea. So we talk about pawn captures. You don't pay attention to suppose you lose your queen, right? It's like no big deal really. I mean, so what? Because whereas in chess you resign right away. If you lose your queen, you resign. But not in Kriegspiel, Even like in our game, what we used to do is suppose you end up with the lone king, then you declare the other person as the winner, if he has enough mateable material, like 2 bishops or rook or queen or something like that, because it's really hard to actually mate, a king.
Then
without
they start
knowing where it
bragging
is.
when they want.
Yeah. So that's kind of the idea. Apparently, they used to play it in a lot of the stats department, like Berkeley
Really?
had Kriegspiel games, and David Blackwell was supposed to be a really good Kriegspiel player.
Oh, we should organize a tournament.
And,
I mean, that would be fun.
yeah,
to do
it would be
sometime.
nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
About Ciprian, you ready for a tournament?
No, or at least get it going. Like have a lunchtime activity.
Let's start it again. Yeah. Can
Yeah.
we do it in kind of a safe environment though?
Oh, that takes some fun out.
Nobody's going to call me an idiot or something.
No.
So, only if you prevent Chuck Rhodey from refereeing. If he's the referee, you should be prepared for anything.
So it's really battleships for adults. I guess.
Yeah.
You have to be good natured too.
Oh,
You have-
Actually, it's
you have
really
to be
a.
able to take a hit
That's right.
Chuck
That's
many
right.
times.
Yeah, but he never used to yell at Professor Royal, though. I used to notice that. He was like, he was always
not as
nice to
much.
him. Yeah.
Yeah, he was nicer to Richard than he
Right.
was to anybody. I don't know why, but.
Yeah. He was especially hard on me and Tom and.
You had the pro crush.
But Ross hollered at everybody.
Yeah. Right. He was very hard on Richard actually.
He hollered at
Yeah.
everybody.
Well, Robbie, thank you very much. That was great. Are there any questions either for Karen or for Robbie?
Yeah, I'm curious to know more about the history of tobacco, Hopkins, and the effect of tobacco on cancer, and especially in the interactions with the other statisticians and with, there were a lot of statisticians who were on the other side of the. I think it would be really nice to have like the entire history from the original paper to the Hopkins versus Harvard debates, and I mean, I don't think that people know in statistics that Hopkins biostat has always been a
So
center
Ciprian, a
for.
very condensed version just came out from John Samet in the most recent AJE,
Right.
which is celebrating the 100th anniversary of the schools. And
Right.
I think it's like 11 pages of packed full of that stuff. So,
Oh,
Right.
I'll definitely
Start.
read that, but
Yeah.
it's something that would be nice for us to have as well. I think whenever I talk to people, I say, well, did you know that? It's like, this is not a known fact. This is one of the single most important things in public health.
Absolutely.
Right?
So I will
Absolutely.
tell you that John emailed me today and said he did sort of suppress some of the more embarrassing things that the school's faculty had done, but that biostat comes off looking really clean the whole time.
Well, yeah, that is a very important story. I devote a good section of the book to it. So we've talked about faculty, we haven't talked much about alumni, and one of the most important alumni from your department who was very involved early on in proving the link between smoking and lung cancer was Morton Levin. And I believe he was like a 1950, 49 or 50 graduate. But he was the first to do studies or do analysis that showed specific types of cancer from specific types of smoking, such as chewing tobacco and lip cancer. The Surgeon General, so there are several Surgeon General's reports. Leroy Burney, who was Surgeon General from 56 to 61, who was also an alumnus of the school, had already come out in, I believe, 1956 and made some kind of statement, we believe that cigarette smoking may be harmful. And so as you go forward in time, you get more statistically certain and more consensus among statisticians and public health researchers that yes, this is, in fact, it's one of the strongest p-values, strongest associations ever in the history of public health research, such that everything after seems kind of lame in comparison. There's just never been anything so strongly associated with a single causative factor as cigarette smoking and lung cancer.
I love your idea, Chiprim, because I think that this is, the department can be very, very proud of its role
Yes.
in this story.
I mean, it goes on and on with,
Absolutely.
with Scott's involvement,
Yes.
Yes.
with the Rubin versus Ziegler.
Yeah,
And,
so
I think
there's-
this is a huge thing that many people in statistics have no idea
I
about.
mean, I think it's true that Cornfield invented the
Right.
odds ratio and the
Right.
case
Unique
control
quantity.
study generated by the issues of smoking and cancer, isn't it right?
Yep, and he
Chair
developed the
chair of
confidence,
Department of-
Inequality.
For
confidence
2 years.
inequality to counter Fisher. Because
Yeah.
Fisher was saying that strong odds ratio could be potentially explained by some unobserved compounder.
Huh.
And so he developed the confidence inequality to show that how strong that confounder has to have an effect on lung cancer risk, sort of disputing that it's almost impossible.
He
That's how-
essentially told Fisher that you have to have a confounder that's 10 times bigger than anything that we've ever seen.
So that's how the
But I think that's a good example of applications driving innovative
methods,
theory.
that's very, very important
Case
method.
control odds ratio.
So, I mean, if you really want to dig deep into this, the book to read is Alan Brandt's The Cigarette Century. It's a book about that thick, and that will really give you a extremely detailed lowdown on how the statistics was built, the statistical case against smoking was built, and the importance of the role that the school played. But I do, in fact, kind of condense. So we were involved in what led up to the 1964 Surgeon General's report on smoking and health, and William Cochrane, who's on the poster, Smoking is Camels, wrote the primary statistical reason, like the heart of that Surgeon General's report was written by William Cochrane. And then the work with Samet and Ziegler on secondhand smoke is kind of like, the sequel, the statistics never stops, and in looking at, because it was a harder case to make, but it was still, very powerfully made by Samet and Ziegler in the 80s and 90s.
Well, why don't we give more time for people to just wander and enjoy treats and that sort of thing. But both to Karen and Robbie, thank you so much once again.
Thank you.